Have you ever heard a massive hit song and thought it sounded suspiciously familiar? The 1970s was a golden era for rock and roll, but it was also a wild west for copyright theft. Some of the biggest bands in the world built their empires by lifting riffs, lyrics, and melodies from lesser-known artists. Today, we are exposing the 10 1970s bands who got busted for stealing songs. Number 10. Led Zeppelin. The 1970s hard rock scene was a totally lawless frontier. Borrowing old blues melodies was widely considered a harmless tradition among British musicians. But one legendary band pushed that casual borrowing past the breaking point. Led Zeppelin was about to find out that you cannot just take whatever you want. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant were absolutely obsessed with American Chicago blues. They routinely took old acoustic blues structures and amplified them into heavy, stadium-shaking anthems. Their massive 1969 hit, "Whole Lotta Love," became the most famous example of this controversial practice. The song featured a mind-bending guitar riff and a psychedelic middle section that blew fans away. But the vocal track was a completely different story. Robert Plant lifted his lyrics directly from a 1962 song called "You Need Love." That track was written by blues legend Willie Dixon and performed by Muddy Waters. He admitted he just needed words to sing over Jimmy Page's heavy guitar riff. For over a decade, the band enjoyed the immense profits without ever bothering to credit Dixon or offer him a dime. Eventually, the Chicago blues community caught on to this blatant musical lifting. Willie Dixon's daughter actually brought the striking similarities to her father's attention. Dixon was a pioneer of the blues and was not about to let his work be stolen by wealthy rock stars.
Woman, you need love. Woman, you need love.
In 1985, Willie Dixon officially took Led Zeppelin to court for copyright infringement. The band was totally busted and realized they could not fight the overwhelming evidence. They quickly settled out of court for a massive, undisclosed sum. Today, Willie Dixon's name rightfully sits next to Page and Plant on the official credits. Number 9. George Harrison. Breaking away from the biggest band in the world is incredibly stressful. George Harrison desperately needed a massive solo hit to prove his worth outside of the Beatles. He found that success with a beautiful spiritual anthem. However, that triumph quickly turned into one of the most famous legal nightmares in music history. In 1970, Harrison released his masterpiece triple album, All Things Must Pass. The lead single was My Sweet Lord, a glorious blend of rock and gospel music. It topped the charts worldwide and cemented Harrison as a brilliant solo artist. But almost immediately, listeners noticed a glaring problem with the catchy melody. It sounded exactly like the 1963 hit He's So Fine by the New York girl group The Chiffons.
He's so fine.
The publisher of He's So Fine, Bright Tunes Music, quickly filed a massive copyright infringement lawsuit. Harrison was absolutely shocked by the accusations. He swore that he had never intentionally copied the girl group's bouncy pop track. He explained that he was actually trying to write a song inspired by the Edwin Hawkins singer's Oh Happy Day. The legal battle dragged on for years through the 1970s. During the trial, Harrison even brought his guitar to court to demonstrate his songwriting process to the judge. The judge analyzed the musical notes and found that the two songs were virtually identical. The 3-note motif and the 5-note motif matched perfectly. The judge ultimately ruled that Harrison was guilty of subconscious plagiarism. He determined that Harrison did not mean to steal the song, but he definitely copied it. Harrison was ordered to pay nearly $1.6 million in damages to the publisher. The bizarre concept of subconscious plagiarism forever changed how the music industry handles copyright claims. Number 8. Rod Stewart. The late 1970s saw rock artists scrambling to stay relevant during the disco explosion. Transitioning to dance music was a huge risk for established rockers. Rod Stewart decided to take the plunge and created a worldwide disco smash. But his trip to the dance floor came with a hefty price tag. In 1978, Rod Stewart released the undeniably catchy Da Ya Think I'm Sexy. The song was a massive departure from his gritty rock and folk roots. It dominated the radio, hitting #1 in multiple countries and selling millions of copies. The track was driven by a signature synthesizer hook that instantly got stuck in your head. But that exact same hook already belonged to a famous Brazilian musician. Jorge Ben-Jor had released a very popular song called Taj Mahal 6 years earlier in 1972. The vocal melody in the chorus of Taj Mahal was identical to Stewart's instrumental synthesizer riff. Jorge Ben-Jor's friends heard Stewart's track on the radio and immediately alerted him to the theft. He quickly filed a lawsuit against Stewart for blatant plagiarism. Stewart did not try to deny the obvious similarities when confronted with the evidence. He later confessed in his autobiography that he had attended the Rio Carnival in 1978. He heard Taj Mahal playing everywhere during the festival and the melody lodged in his brain. He admitted that it was a case of unconscious plagiarism and completely owned up to the mistake. Stewart agreed to an amicable settlement out of court to avoid a messy public trial. To make things right, he decided to donate all of his royalties from the song to UNICEF. He even performed the hit at the famous Music for UNICEF concert in 1979. It remains a legendary example of a massive pop star turning a plagiarism bust into a charitable act. Number 7. Deep Purple. Progressive rock in the early 1970s was highly experimental and deeply competitive. Bands were constantly searching for classical motifs and complex riffs to stand out. Deep Purple wanted to craft epic songs that showcased their incredible musicianship. But sometimes, finding the perfect melody meant borrowing from a band right down the hall. Deep Purple released their groundbreaking album In Rock in 1970. The standout track was Child in Time, a staggering 10-minute anti-war epic. It featured incredible vocal screams from Ian Gillan and mesmerizing organ work from John Lord. The song opens with a hauntingly beautiful, classical-style keyboard intro. That iconic intro instantly became one of the most recognizable moments in heavy metal history. However, that exact keyboard melody was written by a lesser-known psychedelic band called It's a Beautiful Day. They had released a song called Bombay Calling in 1969 on their debut album. Deep Purple's John Lord was a massive fan of the band and had their record in his collection. The band members loved the melody of Bombay Calling and simply decided to play around with it. Ian Gillan later admitted that they completely stripped the original song down and slowed the tempo. They changed the lyrics to reflect the Cold War and built a heavy rock arrangement around it. They simply assumed they could get away with the artistic theft because the original band was relatively obscure. They were very wrong. It's a Beautiful Day quickly discovered the unauthorized borrowing of their signature tune. Instead of launching a massive lawsuit, the San Francisco band decided to exact a clever musical revenge. They took Deep Purple's instrumental track, Ring That Neck, and turned it into their own song called Don and Dewey. This bizarre, unspoken trade-off became a legendary piece of 70s rock trivia. Number 6. John Lennon. Even rock and roll royalty are not immune to the long arm of the law. John Lennon was trying to find his footing as the Beatles were slowly falling apart. He wanted to write a swampy, cool rock anthem for the band's final recorded album. but his tribute to his rock and roll heroes ended up getting him sued.
Come together right now.
In 1969, the Beatles released Come Together as the opening track of the Abbey Road album. It was a massive #1 hit and featured a dark, slinky bass line. Lennon intentionally wanted the song to sound like a classic Chuck Berry tune. He even lifted the opening lyric directly from Berry's 1956 song You Can't Catch Me.
Baby, you can't catch me.
Lennon boldly sang the line, "Here come old Flat Top, he come grooving up slowly." This was a direct rip-off of Chuck Berry's original lyric. The tempo was slowed down, but the melody and words were unmistakably Berry's. The song's publisher, Morris Levy, was a notorious music industry executive who did not take this lightly. He aggressively pursued Lennon for copyright infringement.
Got to be good looking 'cause he's so hard to see.
Levy claimed that Come Together was just an unauthorized derivative work of You Can't Catch Me. Lennon tried to argue that it was an affectionate tribute, not a malicious theft. But in the music business, a tribute without a writing credit is just called stealing. Lennon realized he was fighting a losing battle against a very powerful and dangerous publisher.
Come together right now.
Lennon settled the lawsuit out of court in 1973 with a very unusual agreement. He promised to record 3 songs owned by Morris Levy's publishing company for his next solo album. This forced obligation resulted in Lennon's 1975 covers album, simply titled Rock and Roll. The lawsuit nearly derailed his solo career, but produced a fascinating album of 1950s classics.
Over me.
Number 5. The Eagles.
On the dark desert highway. Cool wind in my
The Southern California country rock scene was highly collaborative and deeply intertwined. Bands toured together, partied together, and constantly shared musical ideas. But the line between artistic inspiration and outright theft can get very blurry on the road. The Eagles learned this the hard way with their absolute biggest hit.
Welcome to the Hotel California.
In 1976, the Eagles released Hotel California, a masterpiece that defined an entire generation. The song featured a haunting chord progression and one of the greatest guitar solos of all time. It sold millions of copies and transformed the band into global superstars. However, the foundational musical structure sounded incredibly familiar to fans of British progressive rock.
Such a lovely place, such a lovely place, such a lovely place.
The chord progression was strikingly similar to a song called We Used to Know by Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull had released their song back in 1969 on their album Stand Up. The crazy part is that the Eagles had actually toured as an opening act for Jethro Tull in the early 1970s. The Eagles heard We Used to Know played live every single night from the side of the stage.
I said I'll never be what I am now.
Years later, fans and music critics started connecting the dots and loudly busting the band. The acoustic intro and the descending chords were far too similar to be a mere coincidence. Don Felder, who wrote the music for Hotel California, always maintained he wrote it alone on a beach, but the court of public opinion had already made up its mind about the obvious borrowing.
You can check out anytime you like, but you can never.
Interestingly, Jethro Tull frontman Ian Anderson never filed a formal lawsuit against the Eagles. He graciously stated that he viewed it as a musical tribute rather than malicious plagiarism. He joked that he was just waiting for the royalties to start rolling in. It remains one of the most famous unlitigated song thefts in 70s rock history. Number 4. The Steve Miller Band.
'Cause I'm a picker, I'm a grinner, I'm a lover.
Creating a laid-back stoner rock anthem requires the perfect blend of catchy lyrics and smooth grooves. Steve Miller was a master at crafting songs that felt familiar and completely effortless. But sometimes his songwriting process involved taking shortcuts that violated copyright laws. He soon found out that powerful music executives were paying very close attention.
And I'm a joker, I'm a smoker, I'm a midnight toad.
The Steve Miller Band released The Joker in 1973, and it became an absolute phenomenon. The song went straight to #1 and introduced the world to the famous Space Cowboy. Fans loved the quirky, nonsensical lyrics and the insanely catchy acoustic guitar riff. But one specific section of the lyrics was not quirky at all. It was entirely stolen. During the song, Miller sings a verse expressing playful, affectionate attraction, followed by a repetitive, romantic hook. These lines were lifted word for word from a 1954 R&B hit called Lovey Dovey by the Clovers. The original track was written by the legendary Ahmet Ertegun, the founder of Atlantic Records.
Lovey-dovey all the time.
Miller thought he was just using a classic blues trope as a clever homage. He didn't realize that Ertegun fiercely protected his publishing rights. Ertegun heard the song dominating the radio and immediately recognized his own exact words. He was not flattered by the homage and decided to take legal action immediately.
Lovey-dovey, lovey-dovey, lovey-dovey all the time.
Ahmet Ertegun successfully sued Steve Miller for plagiarism and won a decisive victory. Miller was forced to add Ertegun's name to the official songwriting credits of The Joker. The settlement ensured that Ertegun received a massive cut of the royalties from Miller's biggest career hit. It served as a stark warning to 70s rockers that R&B legends were fighting back. Number 3. The Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones built their entire early career on covering and adapting American blues music. As they became the biggest rock band in the world, they started writing their own legendary hits. But creating original music for decades can sometimes cause a songwriter's brain to play tricks on them. Even Mick Jagger is not immune to accidentally lifting a hit melody. Even though they ruled the 70s, their most famous plagiarism bust happened a bit later. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards wrote a catchy, melancholic chorus for the track Anybody Seen My Baby? They were extremely proud of the song and were finalizing the record for imminent release. Keith Richards was playing the final mix at his home for his family. His daughter heard the chorus and immediately started singing K.D. Lang's 1992 hit Constant Craving over it. Richards realized with absolute horror that the melodies were completely identical. Jagger had seemingly absorbed the melody of Constant Craving while it was dominating the radio. He regurgitated it years later, genuinely believing he had written an original chorus. The band panicked because the album was already pressed and ready to ship to stores. They knew they were totally busted, and a massive lawsuit was entirely unavoidable if they released it. To avoid a devastating legal battle, the Stones took unprecedented proactive measures.
If I could just close my eyes.
They immediately contacted K.D. Lang and voluntarily offered her and Ben Mink full co-writing credits. Lang was totally shocked and honored to share a credit with her absolute musical heroes. The Stones narrowly escaped a devastating lawsuit by turning an accidental theft into a peaceful collaboration. It proved that sometimes the best defense against a plagiarism bust is total honesty. Number 2. Eric Carmen. Power ballads in the 1970s required massive emotional weight and soaring dramatic melodies. Songwriters often looked to classical music for inspiration when crafting these tear-jerking epics. But borrowing from classical composers is a very dangerous game if you don't check the copyright status. Eric Carmen learned a very expensive lesson about international law. In 1975, former Raspberries frontman Eric Carmen launched his solo career with the smash hit All By Myself. The song was a monumental success, featuring a devastatingly sad vocal performance and a beautiful piano arrangement. It sold over 1 million copies and became the definitive power ballad of the decade. Carmen had openly based the entire verse melody on Sergei Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Carmen was a classically trained musician and felt no guilt about adapting the piece. He genuinely believed that Rachmaninoff's music had completely fallen into the public domain. He assumed the legendary Russian composer's work was free for anyone to use without permission. He happily credited himself as the sole songwriter and collected all the massive royalty checks. However, he made a catastrophic miscalculation regarding international copyright laws. While the music was public domain in the United States, it was still heavily protected internationally. Rachmaninoff had died in 1943, and his estate was still actively enforcing his copyrights worldwide. The estate contacted Carmen's record label and informed them of the massive global infringement. Carmen was officially busted and realized his massive legal error. He quickly reached an agreement with the Rachmaninoff estate to avoid having the song pulled from international shelves. He was forced to hand over 12% of all the song's royalties to the composer's family. It remains one of the most famous examples of classical music copyright enforcement in pop history. Number 1. The Doors.
Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello.
The late 1960s and early 1970s rock scene was driven by revolutionary sounds and fierce originality. The Doors prided themselves on being poetic, artistic, and completely unique in the Los Angeles music scene. But even the most avant-garde bands sometimes succumb to the temptation of a simple pop hook. That temptation led to a massive clash with a legendary British rock band.
I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello.
The Doors released the surprisingly upbeat single Hello, I Love You in 1968. It shot straight to number 1 on the Billboard charts and became one of their most successful singles. The song was driven by a punchy, distorted keyboard and guitar riff that drove fans wild. However, British rock fans immediately noticed that the riff was an absolute carbon copy of another massive song.
Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. Hello.
The Kinks had released their aggressive rock anthem All Day and All of the Night 4 years earlier in 1964. The driving, start and stop power chord riff of the Kinks' song was totally iconic. The Doors had simply smoothed out the edges and applied the exact same rhythm and notes to their track. Kinks frontman Ray Davies was absolutely furious when he heard his riff dominating American radio.
I'm not content to be with you in the daytime.
The Kinks' music publisher immediately filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against the Doors. The Doors tried to deny the theft, claiming they were actually inspired by a completely different jazz song. But the audio evidence was totally undeniable to anyone who listened to the two tracks side by side. The court agreed that the rhythmic and melodic similarities were far too blatant to ignore.
Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. She's wild.
The courts ruled in favor of the Kinks and ordered a significant financial settlement. The Doors were legally forced to pay all of the song's UK royalties directly to Ray Davies. Davies later joked that Jim Morrison essentially bought him a very nice house in England. It proved that even the kings of psychedelic rock could not outrun a stolen riff.
Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. She's home.
The music industry is built on inspiration, but as these legendary artists proved, crossing the line into plagiarism can cost you a fortune. Sometimes the biggest hits in history hide the darkest secrets. If you enjoyed this deep dive into rock and roll's stolen treasures, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more untold music history.